Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Cesar Gavidia, and today we're going to discuss multiple sclerosis and long-term disability insurance claims, and we're going to provide a kind of a guide to what it takes to get approved for long-term disability benefits, discuss our experiences in having represented hundreds of claimants with multiple sclerosis, and providing some other information that'll help put you in the best position to keep your benefits from being denied if you are someone who's already on claim. And Cesar, when you're dealing with a claimant who calls you, who's been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and they kind of want to know always, do you think that my claim will get approved? What is some of the immediate information that you want to know in order to determine if you think that they're ready to file for a long-term disability claim?
Well, one of the things that's pretty common among many of the people that have reached out to us that were suffering from MS and been diagnosed with MS is that they've had the diagnosis for some time. In other words, they could have been diagnosed, sometime in their 20s or 30s, and now they may be in their 40s or sometimes even in their 50s, and they've managed to function and work that period of time. I mean, everybody's different. But that's something that is not uncommon, to have someone who's had a diagnosis with MS that's managed to function and work to the best of their ability because of the type of MS that they have. But now, because MS is such a progressive disease and the limitations and the symptoms, they tend to get worse over time. Now they're finding they're having these problems at work where they're having functionality issues, fatigue problems, cognitive issues. And what's important is to, in cases like that, to be able to show that chronology, that timeline where you can establish and show a progression of the disease.
And so how is a claimant going to be expected to prove that they do have the diagnosis and that they've been suffering to the point where they can no longer do the duties of their job?
So a claimant's going to have medical records. They're going to have records from their, not just the primary care doctor. They're probably going to be treated by a specialist, by a neurologist. That's the specialty that treats multiple sclerosis cases. So you're going to have not just the visits, notes from the visits and the doctor's exams and things of that nature, and your complaints that you've come into them with that are being documented and recorded within those medical records, but there's going to be testing, there's going to be MRIs. What's very common with MS cases is the finding of these lesions in the brain or in the spine, and your doctors are probably going to have ordered a series of MRIs over time because they're tracking and seeing if there's any progression to those lesions, to those findings in those MRIs. Is there growth to them? Are there more lesions now? Also based on the symptoms that you're reporting if you're having issues in your lower extremities, well, they're going to be taking scans and MRIs of perhaps your lower spine for those types of symptoms you're reporting to see if that MS has progressed into that region.
And so, Cesar, when you deal with clients you represent who have multiple sclerosis, it's not often a question of their diagnosis being challenged, as you were saying, but the disability company commonly says to us, and we see it in almost all of the denial letters, that diagnosis doesn't equal disability. So it comes down to the subjective complaints of the claimant, what their symptoms are, what they're reporting that they can or cannot do. How does the claimant get support for their subjective symptoms such that they can prove and meet the burden that the disability insurance company is looking for?
So when you talk about proof, we've brought it up so many times and mentioned it so many times in our videos. You're as disabled as you appear in your medical records. So as I stated, they're going to be looking to that evidence of the progression of this disease. They're looking directly at your medical records. They're also looking at your doctor's opinions, because when you file for disability, your doctor's going to have to complete these very detailed forms, and those forms are gonna ask about your diagnosis, about your treatment, about your potential outcome from the condition, your prognosis, and objective and subjective findings and any potential limitations. And your doctors have to be very clear in those forms that they complete for the disability insurer concerning that information.
And so, Cesar, there's this communication between the claimant and the doctor, and then it's got to be the doctor's got to know how to document the records and put everything in there. And very often we suggest to our claimants that they should do a pain journal. Can you talk about what this pain journal is and why it can be very helpful as additional evidence of a person's functional limitations?
With MS, I'm not going to really call it so much a pain journal because there are so many different symptoms to MS. Pain certainly can be one of those symptoms, but fatigue is also a symptom. Brain fog and cognitive issues are also, memory issues are also symptoms. So let's call it an MS symptom log, and you should be very specific and detailed in tracking these symptoms on a daily basis. So when you do see your doctor, you could come in with this very detailed form, these very detailed logs, and show them your symptoms for that month or for a period of time if you're seeing them every 3 to 4 months or every 6 months. The reason these logs are important is because you're not necessarily going to feel you're not necessarily going to remember how you feel, say in June, if the last time you saw your doctor was in February, and you're not going to remember all of those, the symptoms and the intensity of the symptoms and the degree of these problems that you've had over a 3 to 4 month period. And these logs are very helpful in that regard.
And then you talked about cognitive complaints as a very common symptom of somebody who is diagnosed with MS. What's the best type of medical evidence or tool that a person can use to show some kind of objective evidence of their cognitive limitations?
So neuropsychological testing is really kind of the gold standard with cognitive testing, and this is accepted by disability insurers. If you don't have neuropsychological testing or if you don't have a neuropsychological test in your medical history and your records, and you're complaining of these cognitive symptoms, the disability insurer may end up sending you to a neuropsychological exam. The problem with their examiners is that these are disability insurance company experts. These people are trying to build a case for the disability insurers so that you don't receive these benefits. The disability insurer doesn't have to pay them. And so what you want is your own independent doctor who conducts these neuropsychological exams or prescribes one of these neuropsychological exams. They're done by neuropsychologists, a very specialized medical expert, okay? And so you should have this type of testing done. It's going to be the gold standard. It's going to be what really shows objectively what cognitive issues you may have, what kind of memory issues you may have, what type of executive functioning issues you may have, and the degree that you have those functioning issues. And importantly, it'll also be able to establish that you're not feigning, you're not malingering, you're not faking or exaggerating these symptoms, that they're very real.
And Cesar, with the cognitive type testing, you talked about the malingering and the exaggerating. How do the disability insurance companies try to use that against the claimant? And also, when you talk about that, can you talk about other types of evidence and the way in which the disability insurance company will go about gathering that to challenge the credibility of the claimant?
Yeah, so it's basically, to sum it up, it's character assassination, right? So they're questioning your integrity and the veracity of your symptoms and what you're complaining of through this validity testing, through these hidden tests that they include in neuropsychological testing, and that are arbitrarily, by their experts, arbitrarily considered and determined. And by saying that you're malingering or feigning or exaggerating, they're directly attacking your credibility. The other way that they do that is by conducting surveillance. Okay, you say that you have these problems that never allow you really to leave your home, but then they stick a surveillance team on you and they get you on a good day where you go to the grocery store and do some grocery shopping. Then you drive home, then you take the groceries out of the car and walk them in. and you bring in the garbage can while you're at it, and you look totally functional, and you look like you're basically not having any issues or problems like you're claiming or stating in your forms. But what they're completely disregarding is that they're picking a day out of many days, right? And they're taking that snapshot and they're running with it, and it's a character assassination job.
And the way for claimants to get around all of that is to always be 100% honest in your medical records, in the claimant statements that you're asked to fill out, whether it's monthly or every 2 to 3 months, and not saying that you can't do something when in fact you can. Because Cesar, as you mentioned, if someone says, I can't drive more than 15 minutes in the car, and they get you for 30 minutes, then they're going to cut you off, hands down. Whereas if you tell them everything that you're really doing, you're 99% of the time going to be fine, because that doesn't relate to how you do your job 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, having to be a reliable employee that can always show up. So the best tip from that is be honest. Don't worry about the fact that, a lot of people naturally second guess themselves. Well, if I tell them I can go grocery shopping or take my kids to school or use the computer or type or sit in a chair for 30 minutes, they're going to think I can work. So they don't know how to fill out these forms. Of course, that's where we help claimants all the time and guide them through the claims handling process. But be honest about it, and everything else will fall into place, because the doctors are going to believe what you tell them. And if you're being honest about you can do these certain things but you can't work, it's a lot easier to explain why you can't work than it is to explain why you were driving for 30 minutes when you said you couldn't go for more than 15. That becomes a big problem. So, in summary, the best thing for a claimant to do at this stage is, if you're considering applying, we encourage you to reach out to us, or if you've been denied, send us a copy of your denial letter, send us a copy of your long-term disability policy. We always provide you with an initial free consultation. Whether it's Cesar or myself, we'll immediately set an initial free phone call. We'll tell you how we can help you, some different options we have, and timeframes of what we think everything's going to take. We also really encourage you to go through our website. We have a very unique website in the sense that we have a lot of helpful information. You can search by your disability company, you can search by your medical condition, you can search by your occupation, and you're going to find all kinds of resolved cases that our law firm has summarized, lawsuits around the country that we've summarized, reviews about your disability insurance company, questions and answers. And the reason we want you to know all this information is we want you to start thinking like a disability insurance company thinks. We don't expect you to be a lawyer or have the years and years of experience of handling thousands of claims that we do, but we want you to be aware of who your enemy is per se and what you're going up against, because the better you're prepared, the better chance you have of keeping your benefits approved and preventing yourself from being denied in the future. So no matter where you live in the country, we're available to assist you, and we look forward to speaking with you should you need us in the future.